What time it is? Woo! This book is heavier than what I was expecting. Hi, lovelies. We're back. Hi. We're back with Storytime with Chris. Like I always say, you don't have to watch these videos when they go live. You're more than welcome to watch them in your downtime, nap time, max relax and chillaxing time, in between time, mean time, scheme time, study time, break time, CP time, any time that you want to hear a highly animated voice bring you wonderful stories of magic, fantasy, science fiction, adventure, and many, many more in between. So, we are back. Let's go ahead and get started because I'm going to be cooking dinner soon. Got some beef, lean beef, and some tricolor pasta, some marinara. I'm gonna do some fresh onion and garlic. Make my sauce. A little bit of raw honey in there. I might actually make some corn casserole too. Sounds really good. But let's go ahead and get started. My hair is back today because it's a little wet outside. I have moisturized, but trying to keep frizz level to a minimum. But without further ado, let's go. Oh no, hold on. Gotta get my glasses together. Hold on. I need new glasses, y'all. I've been saying this for a while, but I need to go ahead and get that done. I've just been super busy. All right. Chapter 5. When Jane reached the gray house, Simon and Barney were chattering like monkeys in the living room to Great Uncle Mary, who sat quietly with excitement, and even Barney's fair skin had been flushed by the wind and sun to a faint pinkish brown. "There you are, darling," Mother said. "I was just beginning to worry about you." Simon hailed her with a yell from across the room. "Oh, you should have come. It was fabulous, like being right out at sea. And when the wind was behind us, we went tremendously fast, far better than a motorboat, only we came back in on the engine because the wind dropped, and that was fun too. Mr. Withers came back with us for a drink, but he's gone now. Father went with him to fetch some of the mackerel we caught." "And what's Jane been doing?" said Great Uncle Mary quietly from his corner. "Oh, nothing much," Jane said, "wandering about." When all three children were upstairs, sent early up to bed because Father said ominously when Simon imitated a lightship siren right behind his chair, they were all overtired. Jane knocked at the door of the boys' room and went in to tell them about her discovery and her visit to the vicar. She did not meet quite the enthusiastic response that she had expected. "You copied out part of the manuscript?" Simon demanded, his voice rising to a squeak of horror. "And you showed it to him?" Hold on. There we go. "Yes, I did," Jane said defensively. "Well, for goodness sake, what harm could that possibly do? A little penciled line in a guidebook can't mean anything to anybody." "You jolly well shouldn't have done anything connected with the manuscript unless we all agreed it together." "It wasn't connected with the manuscript, not as far as I knew. I just told him I wanted to find something about the coast." Jane forgot any uneasiness she had felt about the vicar in building a defense against Simon's indignation. "I thought you'd be grateful my finding out the manuscript map shows Kamar Head." "She's quite right, you know," Barney said from his pillow. "It's terrifically important finding that out. For all we knew, up to now, it might have been a map of Timbuktu, and if it turns out from what the vicar says that Thurisik hasn't changed since our map was drawn, it's going to help us when we find there are any clues in the manuscript." "I dare say," Simon said grudgingly, clambering into bed and kicking off the blankets. "Oh, well, yes, it does help. We'll talk about it tomorrow." "Then we can start our quest," Brian said sleepily. "Night, Jane. See you in the morning." "Good night." But the morning brought more than any of them had bargained for. Simon woke first very early. The air was still as warm as it had been the day before. He lay in his pajamas staring up at the ceiling for a little while, listening to Barney's peaceful breathing from the other bed. Then he grew restless, so he went out and padded downstairs barefoot, feeling hungry. If he found Mrs. Polk already in the kitchen, he might manage to have 2 breakfasts. But Mrs. Polk seemed not to have arrived yet, and the house was quite silent. It was not until he reached the flight of stairs leading down into the hall that Simon first noticed something wrong. always on his way down to breakfast. He stopped to look at the old map of Cornwall that hung up on the wall at the turn of the stairs, but when he looked for it this morning, it was not there. Only a rectangular mark on the wallpaper showed where it had hung, and Simon glanced along the wall of pictures down the hall. He saw there were several more gaps as well. Puzzled, he went slowly down into the hall. He found several strange, naked-looking patches where pictures had been taken down, and the barometer next to one empty space was leaning sideways. Simon went across and straightened it, feeling the bare wooden blocks of the floor cool under his bare feet. Looking down the long hall, he could see nothing else unusual at first. Then he noticed that the far end, where the sun was streaming in from the kitchen through the open doorway, several of the blocks had been wrenched out and were strewn all over the floor. Simon stared, puzzled. He stared down the hall towards the kitchen, and then on an impulse turned to his right and reached for the handle of the door into the living room. It squeaked under his touch, as he always did, and nervously Simon opened the door and peered round. Then he gasped. The room looked as though a tornado had blown through it in the night. The pictures hung crooked on the walls or lay torn from their frames on the floor, and the furniture seemed to have Simon's first startled glance to be completely buried in books. Everywhere there were books, scattered all over the floor, open, closed, upside down, heaped on the tables and chairs, mounted on the sideboard, and a lonely few still lying on the empty shelves. All the locked bookcases around the walls that they had been forbidden to touch were empty. The glass doors hung loose from their hinges, with splintered wood showing round their locks, and one or two, completely wrenched away, were propped against the wall. The shelves had been swept clear of everything they held, and the drawers below were open, with papers spilling from them loose onto the chaos of books on the floor. There was a faint musty smell, and a thin ball of dust seemed to hang in the air. For one frozen moment, Simon stood staring aghast. Then he turned on his heel and raced upstairs, shouting for his father. Everyone was woken out of their early half-sleep by his shouts. Led by father, they all stumbled into the passage in pajamas and nightdresses and followed Simon downstairs, trying dazedly to understand the words tumbling over each other out of his mouth. "What is it?" "What's the matter? Is the house on fire?" "Burglars," father said incredulously, following down the stairs. "But you don't get burgled in a village like... Good heavens!" He caught sight of the devastation in the living room through the open door. As Mother, Jane, and Barney followed his gaze, they fell silent too, but not for too long. Wherever they went on the ground floor of the house, they found the same thing. The doors of bookcases had been ripped off, and the books tumbled off the shelves into a chaotic jumble on the floor. Every locked drawer or cupboard had been forced, and the papers from inside scattered wildly about. Even in the breakfast room, half a dozen elderly cookery books had been scattered from a shelf. "I don't understand this," Father said. "This place is practically wrecked, but one or two obvious things that are clearly valuable haven't been touched. That statuette on the mantelpiece there, for instance, and that big silver cup on the sideboard in the front room. There doesn't seem any point to it at all." "Someone was rejoicing in destruction," Barney said solemnly. Simon said slowly, "They must have made an awful noise. Why didn't it wake us up?" "We're 2 floors away," Barney said. "You can't hear anything up there. I like this. It's mysterious." "I don't," Jane shivered. "Imagine someone wandering about down here all night where we were asleep upstairs. It gives me the creeps." "Perhaps there wasn't anyone," Barney said. "Don't be an idiot. Of course there was. Or do you think all the books jumped off the shelves?" "It needn't have been human. It might have been one of those special sort of ghosts that throws things just for fun. A poltergeist," said Father absently. He was opening all the silver cupboards to see if anything had gone. "There you are. One of those." "Well, Mrs. Polk says the house is supposed to be haunted," Jane said. "Oh, dear." They all looked at one another, round-eyed, and suddenly shivered. Mother said, appearing suddenly in the doorway and making them all jump, "Well, it's the first ghost I've ever heard of who wore crepe-soled shoes. Dick, come and have a look out here." Father straightened up and followed her out into the kitchen with the children close at his heels. Mother pointed without a word. 2 kitchen windows were open, the big one over the sink and a small one above it, and so was the door. And on the flat white tiles of the tabletop beside the sink there was the faint but unmistakable outline of a footprint. A large footprint with bar markings across the sole and traces of the same markings on the windowsill above. "Gosh, there's your ghost," Father said cheerfully, though he did not look cheerful at all. He turned on them briskly. "Now, come on, all of you, off upstairs and get dressed. You've seen all there is to see. No." He waved his hands at all 3 children, beginning to protest vigorously. "This isn't a game. It's extremely serious. We shall have to call the police, and I don't want anything touched before they arrive. Off!" Father had one voice which stopped all argument, and that was it. Simon, Jane, and Barney trailed reluctantly out of the kitchen door, and Great Uncle Mary was heavily descending the stairs towards them, clad in a pair of brilliant white pajamas, and with his white hair all standing up on end, which, here's the thing, my father never... So, when I was growing up, I was punished for things that I obviously, either it was me disobeying blatantly or it was just me not doing what I was told after being told multiple times. But my father never whooped me as a child. His voice was enough. Like, my dad just had a certain way of talking that could get you to pay attention and make you stand at attention. My mother is also the same way. If she uses a certain tone, I'm giving her my full undivided attention. I'm 33 years old and I still have an immense amount of respect for either of my parents. Even though I am an adult by technicality and can assert myself appropriately, I still give all due respect to my parents. And reading that passage, that is very much so my dad. My dad, growing up, like, certain times, he would just say stuff and it would just, okay, let's get this done. And that's just how it was. And everybody's parents are different, kids. People get punished by having their favorite thing taken away, or a favorite activity is stopped, or not being allowed to go see friends. Discipline is made so that children can have structure. It doesn't necessarily have to be violent. It doesn't necessarily have to be visceral in its display. It is just a means of assertment that your parental figure or guardian has to just show you discipline. There are consequences for bad behavior, as are rewards for good behavior. So, just wanted to share a little anecdote. Love both my parents. Totally fine. I didn't come out too bad growing up. I don't think I did. But no, I felt that. I felt that passage because, like, my dad could use a certain tone. I'm just like, yes, sir. No nonsense. There we go. He was yawning prodigiously and rubbing his eyes in a puzzled kind of way. Won't do, he was muttering to himself. Can't make it out. Heavy sleep. Most unusual. Then he caught sight of the children. Good morning, he said with dignity, as if he were fully and impeccably dressed. Befuddled though I am this morning, a great clamor has been penetrating up the stairs from down here. Is anything wrong? We've had burglars, Simon began, but Father came striding out after them from the kitchen and clapped his hands. Come on, come on. I told you to go and get dressed. Oh, good. There you are, Mary. The most extraordinary thing has happened. He glared at the children and they hastily ran upstairs. After breakfast, the police arrived from St. Austell. A solid red-faced sergeant and a very young constable followed him like a mute shadow. A constable is the English colloquial term to refer to a policeman. Simon was looking forward to eager questions about his discovery of the crime. At the very least, he thought vaguely he would have to make a statement. He was not quite sure what this meant, but it sounded familiar and important. But the sergeant only said to him, his warm Cornish accent stroking the words, Came down first, did he? Yes, that's right. Touch anything? No, not a thing. Well, I did straighten the barometer. It was crooked. Looking around at the chaos, Simon thought how silly this sounded. Aye, hear anything? No. All quite as usual, eh? Apart from the mess? Yes, it was, really. Aye, said the sergeant. He grinned at Simon, sitting eagerly on the edge of his chair. All right, I'll let ye off this time. Oh? Said Simon, deflated. Is that all? I reckon so, the sergeant said placidly, tucking his jacket down over his stout middle. Now, sir, he said to Father, if we might take a look at this footprint you say you found? Yes, of course. Father led them to the kitchen. The children, drifted behind, peeped through the door. The sergeant gazed impassively at the footprint for some moments, said to his speechless constable, Now take good note of that, young George, and moved ponderously out to the disorder of the living room. You say there seems to be nothing gone, sir? Well, it's difficult to tell, of course, since it's a rented house, Father said, but suddenly nothing valuable seems to be missing. The silver's all intact, not that there's much of it anyway. That cup, as you see, wasn't touched, but they seem to go for the books, and I can't vouch for those. There may well be some missing that we don't know about. 'Tis a proper mess, surely. The sergeant bent down with some effort and picked up a book. A small, deflated black cobweb lay along the top of its pages. Very old, these. Valuable, maybe. Quite well off. The captain is, I believe. If I may suggest, Sergeant, Great Uncle Mary said definitively from the edge of the group. What is it, Professor? The sergeant beamed at him all over his rosy countryman's face, even if he seemed to know Great Uncle Mary inexplicably well. I had no chance to look very thoroughly since most of the bookcases were locked, but I should have said that very few of the books in the house were valuable to a dealer at any rate. None of them were worth more than a few pounds at the outside. Funny, they seem to be looking for something. Hey, look here. The sergeant shifted aside some of the papers whitening the floor, and they saw a pile of empty picture frames. Those are from the hall, Simon said at once. That bumpy gold frame had a map in it at the top of the stairs. No map in it now. All of them been ripped out. Still, I dare say we'll find somewhere in all this clutter. The sergeant rocked to and fro on his heels, gazing with the expression of mild regret at the battered bookcases and pile of books. He rubbed out on his shiny silver buttons thoughtfully, and finally turned to Father with an air of decision. Sure hooliganism. I reckon, sir, can't be no other explanation. Seldom is, round these parts anyway. Aye, said the young constable regretfully, and immediately turned crimson and looked down at his feet. The sergeant beamed at him. Someone with a grudge against the captain, I dare say, having a go at his belongings. Might well be one or two people hereabouts don't like him. He's a funny old bird, wouldn't he say so, Professor? You might call him that, Great Uncle Mary said abstractedly. He was standing looking about him with a puzzled frown. Breaking and doing difficult in a place the size of Thuisic? The sergeant said. People don't expect it. They leave their windows open. And, did you lock up last night, Dr. Drew? Yes, I absolutely do. Back and front. Father scratched his head. I could swear there weren't any windows open downstairs, but I must admit I didn't go around trying them all. Well, no, you wouldn't expect this sort of thing. Beats me why anyone should want to take the risk just to rough the place up and not pinch anything. Now, if I could have one more look at that print. He led the way out of the room. Simon beckoned Jane and Barney to stay behind. Hooligans, he said thoughtfully. He picked up a book that lay sprawled open face downwards on the carpet and shut its covers gently. It doesn't sound right somehow, Jane said. It's all so thorough. Every drawer open and almost every book taken. And every map taken out of its frame. It's just the maps. Have you noticed? None of the pictures, said Barney. The burglars must have been looking for something. And they went all throughout the house because they couldn't find it. Perhaps it wasn't down here, Simon said slowly. Well, it couldn't have been upstairs. How do you know? Don't be silly. There isn't just anything upstairs except us. Isn't there? Well, Jane said, and then suddenly they were all three looking at one another in horror. They turned and dashed out of the room and up the stairs to the second-floor bedroom, where the great square wardrobe stood between Simon and Barney's beds. Simon hastily dragged a chair forward and jumped on it to feel round on top of the wardrobe. His face went blank with alarm. It's gone! There was a fearful moment of silence, and Jane sat down with a bump on Barney's bed and began to giggle hysterically. Stop it, Simon said sharply, sounding for a moment as authoritative as his father. Sorry, it's all right. It hasn't gone, Jane said weakly. It's in my bed. In your bed? Yes, I've got it. It's still there. I clean forgot, Jane babbled, then pulled herself together. When I went to see the vicar, I didn't want to take it with me, and I had to hide it somewhere in my room, so I shoved it right down under the bedclothes. It was the nearest place. The last night I forgot it was there, and I must have gone to sleep without feeling it. Come on. The front bedroom was full of sunlight, and through the window the sea sparkled as merrily as if nothing could have disturbed the world. Jane hauled back the sheet of her rumpled bed, and there, tucked in a corner at the bottom, was the telescope case. They perched in a row on the edge of the bed, and Jane opened the case on her lap. They stared in silent relief at the familiar hollow cylinder of the old manuscript inside. Excuse me. Do you realize, Simon said gravely, this was the safest place it could have possibly been. They could have looked anywhere else, but not in your bed and without waking you up. You don't think they came up and looked in our rooms? Barney turned pale. They might have looked anywhere. Oh, but this is silly. Jane swung her ponytail as if she were trying to clear her head. How on earth could they have known anything about the manuscript at all? We found it in the attic, all hidden away, and it had obviously been there for years and years, and no one can even have been up here in the attic for ages. Think of all that dust on the stairs. I don't know, Simon said. There's a lot of things I don't understand. I only know I've been feeling funny about the manuscript ever since you said that vicar of yours got all excited about the copy of the map. Jay shrugged. I don't see how a vicar could be bad. Anyway, he didn't know about the manuscript. He asked a few questions, but I think he was just being nosy. Wait a minute, Barney said slowly. I've remembered something. There was someone else asking questions. It was Mr. Withers on the boat yesterday when I was down in the cabin with him getting lunch. He started saying a lot of peculiar things about Grey House, and to tell him if we saw anything that looked very old, any old books or maps or papers. Oh no, Simon said. It couldn't have been him. But whoever it was, said Barney in a small, clear voice, they were looking for the manuscript, weren't they? Sitting there in the silence of the Grey House, they all three knew that it was the truth. They must have want it awfully bad. Simon looked down at the manuscript. It's that map part. That's what it is. Someone somewhere knows it's in the house. Oh, I wish we knew what it said. Look here, Jane said, making up her mind. We've got to tell Mother and Father about finding it. Simon stuck his chin out. It wouldn't do any good. Mother would be worried stiff. Anyway, don't you see? We shouldn't have chanced to work it out ourselves then. And suppose it does lead to buried treasure. I don't want to find any beastly treasure. Something horrible's bound to happen if we do. Barney forgot his fright and outraged ownership. We can't tell anyone about it now. We found it. I found it. It's my quest. You're too young to understand, Jed said pompously. We shall have to tell someone about it, Father or the policeman. Oh, do see, she said, added plaintively. We've got to do something after last night. Children! Mother's voice came from the stairs outside, very close. They jumped guiltily to their feet at once, and Simon held the manuscript case behind his back. Hello? Oh, there you are. Mother appeared in the doorway. She looked preoccupied. Look, the house is going to be chaotic all this morning. Would you like to go off swimming and come home for a late lunch about 1:30? Then this afternoon, Great Uncle Mary wants to take you all out. Fine, Simon said as she vanished again. That's it. Barney thumped the pillow in excitement and relief. That's it, of course. Why didn't we think of it before? We could tell someone and still have things all right. We can tell Great Uncle Mary. And that is where we're going to end for tonight. I'm telling you, y'all, this is a huge overarching plot for these 5 books. You're going to hear names and see faces and references to things that you're going to have to pay attention to. So please take notes. It's important. As always, I love you all very, very much. And thank you all so much for joining me for another session of Storytime with Chris. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Bye, lovelies.